This conference will now be recorded.
Hi Abhishek, you can share your screen, I guess. We'll start.
Yeah, sure. Just once.
Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Soumya and I'll be your host for this session. So before we start with the business analysis techniques, I will just take you through Techcanvass and what do we offer. So Techcanvass is an IT certifications training organization for professionals where we help students to crack their certification exams in first attempt. We are IIBA endorsed education provider and PMI authorized. So we provide training for certification exams like ECBA, CBAP, CCBA, Agile, CBDA, and also we train people for project management certifications like PMP, CAPM. So we also have domain courses into banking, finance, healthcare, and many more. So let's start with today's session, which is very interesting, top 5 business analysis technique. And we have with us Mr. Abhishek Srivastav, who is an expert in this field, and he'll take you through these techniques. So Abhishek, I would request you to take the session ahead, and thank you everyone for joining.
Sure. Thanks, Soumya. So good morning, good evening, everyone. So today's webinar is going to be on top 5 business analysis techniques. Uh, there's always there are a number of techniques which are used by business analysts uh, when they're performing business analysis activities. These are some of the techniques which are basically chosen by me for this particular session. This in any way does not signify that the other techniques are not important or not used. There are many other techniques which are commonly used but not included into this session because the time is limited. So we are going to look at some of the techniques which are very useful and why they are useful. I will also share that, and if time permits, I'll also give you an example. As far as I am concerned, I have now close to 28 years of experience in the IT industry. I have worked in the roles of business analyst, project management, and even account management. And currently, I'm an author, a blogger, and a trainer. And I'm also CBAP certified professional. So now, without wasting any further time, let's start with the webinar. So these are the 5 techniques which we're going to cover today. Okay, so these are context diagram, user stories, backlog management, document analysis, and process modeling. I have picked up these because I feel these are pretty important from a business analysis requirements handling perspective. Okay, there are many other techniques which can be used for various other activities of business analyst. But before we get into the details of this, I just would like to understand participants' background as to uh, what are you currently doing? Are you an experienced business analyst or you are new to business analysis? Just type in the chat window, or if you want to unmute and speak, that's also okay with me.
Hi Srivastava, myself Bhargav Viyappu. I am starting my career as a business analyst.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so I can see messages coming in. Intermediate. Hi Jeff, you're intermediate, then experienced, new, intermediate, 10 years, new. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. So there are it's a mixed kind of audience where some people are new, some people are intermediate, some people are experienced. Fair enough. One more question. Out of these 5 things which you can see on the screen, which one you are familiar with? Are you familiar with any one of these? Or rather, better still, which ones you are not familiar with? Okay. Okay. All right. So I guess there are people who are not familiar with context diagram, process modeling. Some of you are familiar with all. Okay. Mostly context diagram and process modeling. Something which, all right, no problems. All right. Okay. I'm going to talk about all the 5. So any which way, I just wanted to understand the familiarity with these techniques. All right. So let's start with the simplest one, which is document analysis. Now, document analysis, there are certain techniques in the world of business analysis where we do it, but we don't know that this technique is known as this. Document analysis is probably one of them. So document analysis is something which you do always in every project, in every situation. It's a technique which is used to look at and review available documents of the current project, past project, or from a reference source. Why do we need to look at the documents? Because you want to know more about the project, you want to know about the user background, you want to know more about the customer, you want to know more about processes which are existing and which you're going to replace. That is something which is commonly done in every project. Now, this is very important because many times you can get a lot of information from the existing documentation. Especially, for example, if you are looking at improving a process. So there is a process, for example, in a bank, account opening is a common process. Every bank, you can go to the bank and open an account. Let's say a bank is able to open a new account in 24 hours or 10 hours or 1 day, but they want to improve it to maybe 1 hour or maybe instant. That is something which is called process improvement. And process improvement is not just about writing a better software. It is about removing all the hurdles which is delaying the process. In those cases, it's not only about looking at the current process, how does it work, but you should also be looking at the manuals of the departments, how they are doing the activities, what are the bottlenecks. All of these require some kind of review of existing documentation. Sometimes you may need additional things, but we are focusing currently on document analysis. So that is one area which is extremely useful as far as document analysis is concerned. Then you can also use it during solution implementation and confirming elicitation results. For example, you are discussing requirements with your stakeholders or the business stakeholders. There are two teams. One team is talking to one group and talking to another group. Now these two groups are working for the same organization and they're giving you requirements for the same system. Now you capture it from the group one. Now how will you confirm that? One way to confirm is to go back to the group one and present it to them to confirm. Second one is that if there are common elements, you can go to group two's documentation and match it and review that to see whether your requirements are correct or not. So document analysis is something which sounds very ordinary, very kind of innocuous kind of thing, but it is something which is very handy in any kind of business analysis activity. Okay, so most of you will be doing it, I'm 100% sure. It's just that possibly you were not aware of the name of this technique. Second is backlog management, backlog refinement. There are multiple names which are given to it. Okay, now again, this in terms of complexity of this task, it's a simple task, but the importance of this task or this technique is very high. What is backlog management? It is actually maintaining the backlog document and keeping it up to date. So a backlog document is nothing but in agile projects, we use it to maintain the to-do list. So all of you have seen backlog documents. Backlog documents are basically a list of all the requirements for a project ordered in a prioritized way. So anything which is high in priority is at the top of the backlog document. Okay, that's a common practice. If you're using Jira, in Jira also you can create backlog. You can keep on adding the user stories and tasks, and you can go to backlog document and you can see all the tasks together. So the backlog can contain multiple things. It can contain requirements in the form of user stories or any other format. It can contain defects. It can contain change requests. It can contain any other items which you discover during the project. That is the backlog. So when backlog documents are created, it's not a static document. It's not that something which you do once and then you forget about it. It's a moving document. It's a dynamic document. There are multiple reasons why you need to manage or maintain a backlog document. Some basic needs as to why we need to maintain it and keep on updating. One, let's say there is one requirement. This is a sample of Excel sheet based backlog document. Let's say there is one requirement which is written here. Customer says this requires to be changed. Like it says there is an ability to reset the password for every user. Customer says no, it can be reset, but it can only be reset by an admin. User can only send a request for reset. Any kind of change can happen. Now you need to change this. You come to the backlog document and change the document according to the requirement of the customer. That is one reason why you need to maintain the backlog. Second, you have a list where you can see the priority. How is the priority? 1, 2, 2, meaning 1 is the sprint number 1, that is to be done first. These two are to be done later. That is sprint number 2, iteration 2. Now customer comes and say no, this priority has to change. This item, a specific item called this one, we don't need it now. Maybe we can do it later. What will you need to do? to come and change the priority of this item. So either you make it blank to indicate that it is not to be done right now. It's like parked, something called parked. So you can park a backlog item. Okay. There are also estimates which are mentioned in the backlog document. So another point of change in the backlog document is before the iteration starts, there is a meeting of the sprint team members. That is called sprint planning meeting, where you sit together to agree on the estimates and the complexity of each of the items to be taken up during this sprint. It is possible that one of the team members has a valid point that this estimation is not correct. It should be 40. Obviously, there could be some reason, and if everybody agrees, this needs to be changed, right? So there are various reasons why you need to manage and maintain the backlog to keep it updated. Otherwise, what will happen if somebody comes and looks at it and your backlog is not updated? They are never going to get the right information because there is no other source from where they can look at the current requirements which are underway or to be developed. Okay, so this is an extremely important aspect of managing your backlog, especially backlog management is more used in the agile projects, but it doesn't mean that in waterfall based projects or in a hybrid project we don't have anything like management of requirements. Requirements are managed everywhere. Whenever you are looking at requirements, it has to be updated, it has to be maintained so that it's always up to date. So in waterfall based projects we don't use the term called backlog management, but there we use something called requirements management. So we have something called traceability matrix where we manage the requirements and keep it updated. Okay, has anyone seen a requirements traceability matrix?
I have not seen, but I have seen some examples like it traces your requirement with the like the epics or the user stories with the maybe test cases and also sometimes the development code, whatever ID it has, it can be mapped to that particular build number or something like that. So it has a traceability. The requirement has traceability drilling down uh, to the further events maybe.
Yeah, correct.
It is to make sure that all the requirements have been tested or not before the deployment.
Yeah, that is also one of the uses of traceability matrix, correct. Traceability matrix, Kamaljit is asking, is used only in waterfall methodology and not in. See, in agile projects, generally all the requirements are managed in backlog, and the amount of work you do is small. So sometimes we feel that traceability is not required, but it is required there also because at the end of the day, you need to have the traceability of requirements because you have, if you have to manage changes later on in the project, you still need that relationship to be able to do the impact analysis and the change impact correct. Now, the three other things which we are going to do now is a context diagram and user stories. Okay. So now these techniques are early stage techniques when you are starting to discuss the requirements with the customer. Okay. So as the name suggests, context diagram is used to set up the context of a system. not the context of the requirement. So it's a very, very, very early stage diagram to understand the context of the overall system. It's like, for example, if you see a piece of land, okay, it's let's say 100 acres of land. A new builder comes in and says, okay, we are going to build a big project into this. You are a buyer, possible potential buyer into that project. You are not going to invest in that just by looking at the piece of land, no matter how what the builder says that it's going to be big project and so on, unless they're able to show you the model of the project. Nobody will get convinced just by looking at piece of land. There could be some risk takers, but those are exceptions. So what do builders do? If you go to their residential projects office, you'll see a model which shows where is going to be your different amenities, what are the road which lead to the project, how the internal structure will be, what are the different models or the blocks which will be built, right? Context diagram is something like that. It's not a 3D model, unlike the residential blocks, but it's a model which tells you about the overall project, how it is structured, what are the different elements of it at a very, very high level. Okay, so for example, if let's say there is a residential block which has residential complex which has 3 buildings. If you ride in a helicopter and go to 10,000 feet, what will you see? You'll be able to see maybe these 3 blocks, A, B, and C. Of course, you can't see the name, but you will see these 3 boxes. And if they're connected, maybe you can see this. That's all you'll be able to see. Context diagram is exactly a 10,000 feet view of a system, where you just try and understand what are the different blocks, whether it is an internal part of the system or there could be some external entities which is also required, which make up this system. Okay, so for example, let's say this is a simple example, okay, for which I'm going to ask you to try and visualize what are the different elements of it. Okay, but let's say before this I can give you an example of, hold on. Okay, let's consider a simple system called e-commerce website. Any e-commerce website, think of Amazon, Flipkart, whatever you can think of. Now if I try to make a context diagram of an e-commerce website, once the highest level of thing will be like this. There is a payment gateway, which is an external system, and this is your e-commerce website, and they are connected to each other. That's the highest level, meaning absolutely black box kind of a context diagram. Okay, so that is one way of doing things. You can go a little further down and say, okay, in the e-commerce we can have a module called product management. We can also have a module called user management. We can have another box called order management. You can also have reviews, something like this. You can now think of that, okay, there are 4 other modules in this system, and then these modules are going to talk to the payment gateway, or the order management is going to talk to payment gateway. This is the way we try and understand the context of a system when we are starting up. This is not something which is you are going to make after you have completed the requirement study. Okay, because it has no meaning after that. After a point, when you start getting to the requirements and start writing user stories, these things start becoming more and more irrelevant, because now you are understanding it in a much more detailed manner. Okay, so how does it help? It helps in the beginning, because now you say, okay, there are four modules and an integration. So I'll start looking at the requirements, specific requirements of product management. So I'll write the user stories for a product management module. Then I'll write the user stories for the order management module, and so on and so forth. This helps me in tracking even, am I able to complete the requirements for all the modules? So in a way, it provides you a tracking of how well you are covering all the requirements. Okay, so this is how context diagrams have been very, very useful. Now, let's just read this. This is another.
Abhishek sir, I had a quick question on the context diagram. May I ask now or at the end of the session?
No, not end of this session. As
Uh,
let me tell what I am looking at. So just
okay,
read this
sure.
question case study and tell me which all modules you can think about. If you have to think about a context diagram for this system, what all modules you can think of? Yeah, now you can ask the question.
Sorry, I was on mute. So my question is like, if as a business analyst, currently I am into a project which is in the discovery phase, and first 2 weeks of the discovery phase have been completed. Like not detailed requirement sessions, but BA workshops are going on in which I'm trying to understand the requirements on a high level. But I've passed the phase where I mean, I don't know if I can still create a context diagram to take a sign off from the product owner on the requirements and scope, or like I should. I've already passed that phase, like of taking writing a context diagram. Would you suggest?
No, see, as you are starting to go to the, as you are mentioning the second round, maybe I'm understanding that you are writing, maybe at this stage of creating processes. So at that point in time, context diagrams lose their importance, because
Hmm.
it's a very high level diagram. There's no point in making it at that point in time.
Yes, yes, because there are certain requirements now that are under discussion, and they've started like a little bit on each of the high level feature discussions. But yeah, I understand. Okay, thanks. That answers my question.
If you have not made it, then there's no point in making it. But if you have
Mm,
already made it at the early stage, then you can use it for tracking whether you are covering all the modules or not.
okay, okay. And and if I want to take a like a sign off from the client that this particular require like high level features are in scope and this is out of scope, what is the best method? Can I just drop an email, or is there any other process or something that will help take a sign off from the product owner that okay, so that they don't keep changing the requirements, I mean the features again and again? Like it's a fixed budget project, it's not a waterfall, it's an agile, but I don't know, I mean if you have any suggestion here.
No suggestions, because there's no, even if they sign off, there's no guarantee that the
Yeah.
requirements will not change. So
Even inclusion of a new feature is allowed in agile, like totally something which was not even discussed in the discovery phase,
yes,
like
it is possible. See, look, as
okay.
long as you and your customer are agreeing that this is the scope, and if there is anything which is beyond the scope, it will be on a chargeable basis. Okay,
Okay.
then it should be, that is the way it should go. Because saying that you can stop customer
Mm-hmm.
from giving you a change, that
Mm-hmm.
is not going to happen, because it's not
Mm-hmm.
about whether customer is asking it for some dummy reason. There could
Mm-hmm.
be genuine reasons why they're asking for a change.
Right.
Okay. So agile is about managing those changes which are coming in at any point in time. As long as it does not become a burden on the vendor. As an IT
Mhm.
company, you want
Mhm.
more business.
Yes.
So if there is an agreement saying that this is our scope, so the context diagram
Mhm.
is kind of one of the scope diagrams.
Okay.
So this is your scope. If you
Mhm.
go beyond this, it will be
Mhm.
on a chargeable basis. Customer says yes, then go ahead. As long as they're able to pay for the additional things, keep on taking it as long it goes. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Got your point. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I can see some answers: order management, admin, product management, customer management, payment, vendor, employee. Okay, payment details.
Uh, Srivastav, here I got a question like they are going to send invoices, but how are they going to send? Are they going to send through like any mail, or are they going to use any EDI services?
That can be that you can ask when you are talking to the customer.
Okay.
Correct, Mike. That's what I think. That is the correct point. Is that you need to have that scope variation clause. Yes, Mike has mentioned the name. So that's something which you need to have an agreement with the customer, saying that if there is a scope variation, you pay for it. Otherwise, it leads to confusion and an unnecessary uh, conflict.
Yes. Got it.
So if you look at the context diagram for this, it's like we are making a sales order system where there is a customer. Okay. So customer is going to interact with your system. So system is at the center. System in the sense, the system which you're going to build. That is at the center. All the external entities. One of them is customer, then employee, then admin. Sorry. These are the three entities which have been mapped here. These three entities are going to interact with your sales order system to be able to perform most of the activities as mentioned in the paragraph. So admins will manage the employees and vendors. Employees will update the product and update the category, which are to be listed on the website. And customers will make the order, make the payment. They will get the invoice and receive. Okay. You can also add payment gateway as one of the entities. Okay, because that's an external entity and the sales order system is directly going to interact with the payment gateway for facilitating the payment. Why it is not made here is because it is not explicitly mentioned, but it's a common sense. I mean, I think I will modify this diagram later and I'll add that also, because no payments nowadays is managed solely by a particular organization. Everybody talks to the payment gateway to make it happen. Okay, but now this basically gives you not only the interactions but also different types of interactions from this system. Okay, so this also kind of leads to some specific functions or specific requirements to be added in the system, and maybe add more questions which you can now go and ask to the customer as to how these things will happen. Like for example, updation of product. So it can happen through a screen. And if there are bulk updates, can it also happen through Excel file or some CSV file? All those things will come later as you start picking up more details of a particular functionality. So that is how you start with a context diagram. Now those context diagrams, as I mentioned, will lead to requirements. And those requirements you can represent as user stories or use cases. Okay, so you can pick up the thread from here and this becomes your candidates for writing user stories. Okay, so user stories are quite common and quite popular as far as capturing requirements are concerned. Okay, now why user stories are so popular? Why can't we just say in pure English that one of the functionalities of the system is to manage employees? Why do you need to write user stories? What is the difference which it makes? Anybody?
Because they are like sufficient enough to describe the requirement, and unlike waterfall where a lot of effort and time was spent in detailing the requirements, uh, user stories follow invest criteria, and uh, it's best to describe the requirement.
Okay, I'll answer this. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay. So Mike is saying it helps people to visualize how the user will interact with the system. Yeah, that is an important point. Anita is saying to be concise and provide clarity. Okay. Sundamani is saying so the requirement is described from user perspective. Yeah, correct. That is the user perspective point is very important for user stories. Golden Das is also saying the same. Okay. So user stories, one aspect which has clearly you people have mentioned already, it takes the perspective of the user. So when I say user, it is the actual user of the system, which may be different than the people whom you are talking to for requirements. For example, in an e-commerce website, there are two types of users. One is a customer who's going to buy the product from your system. Other one are the employees who are going to upload the product and modify them and keep them updated. Both are users, but they have different perspectives of using the system. The one other important aspect of user stories is that it also allows you to justify or mention why this user is going to use something in the system. And that why is very, very important. This is one of the formats of writing user stories. So it says as a user role, meaning who. I want to do something, which is what, so that I can achieve some goal, which is why. Who does what for what reasons and why. That is the user story format. Now, let's see an example. So as a user, I want to search for flight tickets so that I can find the right flight for attending a business conference. So somebody is going to search for flights because they want to attend or go somewhere for business reasons. Okay. Now here lies the power of user story. If you are going to book, let's say you go to booking.com. Okay. Now booking.com, nowadays, if you see some of the portals, they're asking you who is traveling and why you are traveling. What difference does it make? Consider this person. This user is going to attend it for a business conference. Fair enough. But is there only one type of user who is searching for flight? Or there could be people who are going on vacation with a family and they're also searching for flights. Now, what is the difference? And is it useful for your customer? It is very useful. Because if as a business, I know that the person who is searching for flight is a traveler, frequent traveler, business traveler, I will throw him a frequent flyer program. You become a member, every time you book a ticket from us, you will get points. So that next time when you come, you can use the points. Or after collecting some points, you can use them. That will give me the loyalty of the customer. If I know that you are a family traveler for vacation, I can throw you a package. That if you're going to, let's say, Paris, I can give you a tour at a discounted price. That is the advantage of why user stories are becoming more popular, is because of this reason. Otherwise, I can simply write that users can search for flight tickets. What's the problem with that? It's as simple, even more concise than this format, isn't it? So there is a reason why user stories are becoming so popular. Okay, for the same system, uh, if you have to write user stories, this is the way you can write some of the user stories. So there is a customer who wants to place an order because they want to get the required components for their bikes. As an employee, they want to update the categories, product categories, so that newer products with newer categories can be seen on the system. So the parallel process, or the competing process for user stories is, or competing technique rather, is use cases. You can also use use cases for writing user story, writing requirements. Okay, that's something which is also very popular and uh, used quite a lot. And there is no restriction that you can't use use cases in agile projects, or can't use user stories in waterfall projects. There's absolutely no connection between the technique and the methodology. Okay, so methodology is waterfall, agile, or something in between, which is called hybrid, which is predominantly what we use. Techniques are independent of these. Depending on the scenario, we can choose one technique which can be used. Last technique for today is process modeling. So once you have written the user stories, the next step is to see if this particular activity or the requirement can be fulfilled in one step, or it requires a process. So theoretically speaking, every user story can have an associated process, theoretically speaking. But for example, search. Search is you enter the criteria and you get the results. It's a two-step process. Okay, but there could be processes like, for example, if you go to an airport and you are trying to board a flight, it's a long process. There is a PNR check. There is boarding stickers, or sorry, your luggage stickers which are printed. Seat allocation happens. If you have extra luggage, there's a charge for it. So there's an order and payment and receipt. And then finally your boarding pass is printed. So if you are talking about a user story which is about checking in for a passenger, it has a process. It has multiple steps. Now, how will you show the multiple steps for a particular requirement? By using a process diagram. So as you are understanding, might be visualizing that we started with context diagram, then we use user stories or use cases or simple textual format for writing requirements. Then we move on to the process model. In between, there is something called scenarios, which is also done, which is a prerequisite for process model. But process modeling is a straightforward diagram, which is used to show the steps to complete a task. There are multiple techniques. Process modeling is a family. It's unlike user stories or use cases, which is like one technique. Process modeling is not like that. You can use flowcharts. You can use activity diagrams, which is a UML family diagram. You can use BPMN. There are many other process modeling techniques. But at the end of it, process modeling is about showing the steps for a process. So it can have the steps and it can have scenarios which will signify that one particular step can be done in multiple ways. For example, in the boarding scenario which I was talking about, a simple check like, is your PNR valid? Yes or no, two different paths will happen, right? So similarly, if you go to Amazon and search for a book is not available, Amazon shows you recommendations. If book is available, it shows you all the listings, right? Which means there are two different paths, which is even used in the search results. That is how process diagrams are made. This is an example of an activity diagram. So between activity and process flow chart, there's hardly any difference as such, except symbols how they are shown. So here you can see start is like this, end is like this. In here, it's a black spot, single circle. This is a concentric circle. Okay, but otherwise, the steps and all more or less look the same, and there is hardly any difference. One additional thing which is used in process diagramming is called swim lanes. What are swim lanes? Nothing but just to show who are the users who are doing these activities. So in the user stories, you have already identified some of the users of the steps. Else, you need to identify during the process diagram. So whosoever is this user, you can identify it and put it. This kind of tells you immediately that in this process, these activities are done by account holder. This is done by the ATM machine or the software on the ATM machine, and this is done by the bank server. It's not book server, it's bank server. Okay, so this is kind of gives a better visual of the process. Okay, now process diagrams are used, as you can understand, it's a common thing. It has to be used in every project, but it becomes even more important when we are doing process improvement projects. Here, what we do two process models, one for the existing process and one for the improved process. And then we compare them to find out what is to be done. Because the existing process is already there, is working. The future process is something which is going to be implemented. So either the entire existing process is outdated, you need to develop a fairly new one, or there are certain changes which needs to be covered. So it allows you to find out the gaps also. So the current process or current process diagram is called as is diagram. The future process is known as to be diagram. That's a common practice in business process management projects as well as product implementation projects. You will hear these if you're working in a product implementation environment, you will hear these things quite often. Gap analysis document as is in to be processes. Same happens in business process management projects. It can also be used. So BPM is also used for process optimization. As I was talking about earlier, if an account opening process needs to be optimized, currently it's taking 8 hours and the bank wants it to be done in 1 hour. That's a process optimization. There also process modeling is very, very helpful. Okay. So how this is used to a great effect by combining it with some elicitation techniques. The best example, some of you who are from India will be able to identify with it, but I will anyway give you that example. Is that uh, 10 years back, if you are applying for a new passport or if you want to renew your passport, not 10 years, I think it was 15 years back, you had to stand in a queue for several hours. Some people used to go at 6 a.m. to stand in the queue so that they get to the window first. Now it takes half an hour to 1 hour at the most without hardly any waiting. And this has not happened just because there are some rules which are changed. The entire process of accepting documentation, doing the verification is completely segmented and changed. And that has happened with a combination of two things. One, process optimization by using a technique called observation. This project was done by TCS in India. So they looked at what is the bottleneck. So whenever there is a process improvement, you look for the bottlenecks. Where there is a delay, it's like if you see a highway, suddenly one track is blocked for some reason. You'll see there is a jam. Why? Because 4 lanes are coming, 4 lanes of vehicle, and now they're merging into 3 lanes. So the incoming is more versus the outgoing. That's the bottleneck. That also happens in the process. So if 20 people are standing in front of a window, okay, and that person takes 15 minutes to cater to one person, you imagine the 20th person, how much time he has to wait. Simple logic, right? So what you do, you divide that 15 into maybe 5 minutes each. So waiting time comes down by 1/3. Okay, so this is something which is a very important type of project which today or tomorrow you might be encountering in your career. Okay, this is one of the, this is an example of a process diagram for a particular bank, but process diagrams are uh, made by using decision boxes and the steps. Okay, that's not a very complicated structure, but to be able to understand the steps and to be able to know where are the decisions involved, you need to use a set of close-ended and open-ended questions while you're talking to the customer, because this does not come directly from the user stories. Let's say, for example, we have captured a requirement saying uh, account opening, for example, for a bank. So as a customer, I would like to open an account so that I can transact the financial whatever activities. That's the user story. But how will you know what are the steps involved? If you expect that customer will directly tell you that, okay, I know how the flowchart is created, so I will tell you all the things in the way flowcharts are created. No customer is ever going to tell you that way. So how will you ask the question? That is where open-ended question, which is more like a descriptive question. Please explain how the account opening process is handled at your bank. That will give you some steps out of this. Then you ask follow-up questions, you brainstorm with your team members, and that's how you come up with the steps of the process diagram. Sorry, this is an old one. So that's all I want to discuss today. 5 techniques which are very important. There are many other techniques, as I've already told you, which are also useful, like use cases, like data modeling, like prototyping. Those are also very, very important techniques. Maybe I'll cover those in some other webinar. So I'll open it for question answers. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. Let me first answer. I can see a few questions here. Can user stories be supported with flowcharts activity? Yeah, as I think I have already answered that question. User stories are extended by activity diagrams. Data modeling is nothing but explaining the elements of a prototype or a screen to the developers, that what kind of a screen it is, what kind of field it is. For example, PNR. Developer, if you tell PNR is a number, developer will try and match that field to be a number field. Okay, but PNR is not a number field. It's basically an alphanumeric field. So sometimes what happens is, unless you explain it as to what each element on the screen means, there is a confusion in the minds of the, or there's an ambiguity, and it can result into multiple errors. Thanks, Apan. Yeah, any other questions? Please go ahead. Thank you, guys. Anita is asking which BA tasks use these techniques. This is the initial requirements analysis and development, elicitation and collaboration to requirements analysis and design definition. All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks all everyone for attending this. Have a good weekend. Good weekend. Thank you.